So I guess my question is, have we made it to that point in our relationship where you miss me? Oh God, I'm sick. I'm okay. I'm good. I am so happy. Like, if you are hearing my voice and if you heard that bang up pickup line that I just dropped, you're probably listening to I Swear to Drunk I'm Not God. Just saying. Not only that, are you probably listening to Brittany Perkins, who is the host of this situation. Now, I can't ramble this time because, we got some information for you. Like, the research hole that I just climbed the fuck out of. I don't know if you noticed, but like, this man is a lot. And so I had spent a lot of time taking some many, mental health moments in the process. Taking many, many mental health moments in the process. I've tried to give you as much information as I can. And I'm only going to give myself the next 40 seconds to just say thank you for coming back to I Swear to Drunk I'm Not God, because we're about to get it started. Wait, but before I even go further, you don't know what I'm sipping on. Today's poison is a little recipe I found curated by a bartender in New York. I really wish I had written his name down, but I didn't. It was called Bicycle Thief, and you'll see why I chose that one today. Bicycle Thief has lemon juice in it, tonic, or in my case, I use the grapefruit sparkling water by Fever Tree, which is like my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing. Gin. I used my other new favorite thing is Empress gin, the indigo gin. Oh my God. Got that. Put that in there, but you can use whatever gin you want. A little bit of simple syrup. You're probably like, Brittany, this isn't the fucking recipe. And I'm like, you're right. Okay. Some of us have to maintain this girlish figure. So yeah, I replaced my simple syrup with motherfucking light organic agave nectar. And I also use Fever Tree, which I love. It's only 70 calories. You know what I mean? We got to balance out. When you're a drinker like me, you got to start like learning how to like diet drink, which is sad because most, athletes will be like, well, how about you just stop drinking? But whatever. Fuck those people. So what I was about to say was though, so it was Fever Tree, the grapefruit juice, lemon juice, soda water I didn't use, but that's in the traditional version of this. It's just that I didn't use it because I was already using sparkling water. So no soda water for me, but sure, soda water for you. Campari, which I just started to appreciate like 2 years ago because I'm a more of a French girl myself. I love me some Aperol, but Campari was a little too something for me, but I've learned to appreciate it. And Campari, you shake it up. Now, please do not shake up Fever Tree sparkling water or soda water because it will explode on you. Come on, let's go back to physics here. Do not put effervescent water in a shaker it's just going to explode. I've done it. The reason why I'm so confident about this is because I've done it. Okay, so I'm going to take a sip. So this is the Bicycle Thief. All right. Now, again, Swear to Drunk I'm Not God podcast is where we drink our drink for the homies that ain't here. Okay. We tell the stories of these psychos and shit and the things, but it's really about the victims, and being able to tell the story. And obviously it feels like some sick shit. And in a way, it's some sick shit that we love this shit so much, but it's really the interest more than it is like admiring these pieces of shit. Now, speaking of piece of shit, we are talking about the main one. If you listen to episode 1, part 1, you would know we are talking about the monster of 63rd Street, Mr. Motherfucking H.H. Holmes. Okay, so last time we were on, the only time we were on, I talked about H.H. Holmes and I kind of got into his life. Okay, I got into where where this dude came from. You know, we learned he came from New Hampshire. We learned he was the third of 5 kids. We learned of his first marriage to Clara Lovering. We learned of his first child, Robert. We learned of the school years, the college years, people who hated him, the fact that he smelled like smegma. We got into him, you know, his stints in medical school. We got into his situation with Clara. Okay, where, you know, he's a little bit of a deadbeat dad type shit. We also got into, you know, that tail end of his college life where, you know, he graduated and we started to slowly but sure see that this dude is a motherfucking con artist and he is only worried about him. He ain't worried about nobody else. Okay. And then we got into him leaving New Hampshire and moving on into New York. And then boom, he's in Chicago. And we're like, what are we supposed to do with this data? This is a lot. So that's what we talked about last time. Sorry, I'm adjusting my mic because I feel like it's in my face. And then we talked about that weird little insurance scam that he had right before he went to Chicago, where he and a couple of other people were supposed to steal 3 bodies in order to fake their quote unquote the death of this man and his wife and his child. The fuck. So yes. So just like we left off on that tomfoolery, it don't get better. We do not go up from here. We only sink. We sink and then we flap our little arms in quicksand in hopes that we're going to be able to get out. And no, we fucking ain't. It only gets worse. So let's get into episode 2 again. And I'm saying episode 2, really it's episode 1, part 2, but let's get into that. So take your sip or whatever the fuck you drinking. Hope it's a bicycle thief, but it's up to you. Now, we learned last time that Holmes was kind of in need of money, that he was struggling and that, you know, he was just such a hustling go-getter that he was like, I gotta do something to get out of this financial rut that I'm in. But turns out it's not that likely that Holmes was not like that he was in need of money. So like a boarding house owner Holmes knew said that Holmes would often have cash. So he was like using this profit situation as an excuse to commit crimes that he just wanted to commit anyway. That's my theory. Like, I think he wanted to do it. Yeah. And the profit thing. Yeah, for sure. But, I think that his profit situation, I think he was inherently an evil person. And I think money was a nice reason to do it for him. So according to The Devil in the White City, a boy died after taking medicine, bought from the drugstore Holmes worked at when he was in Pennsylvania. And this is when he immediately just fucking up and leaves the city. Now, I don't know if that's completely true. Like I told you all last time, I've been following a couple books. I actually started to just solely rely on one. And, you know, that's obviously no disrespect to the tedious work that these other authors put into these books. But motherfucking Adam Seltzer is a different type of dude, because I was reading and I was like, I cannot imagine being in these archives looking at all this shit. How do you have all of this information? And we're going to talk about too, I did the tour. He had an H.H. Holmes tour last week. I did that too. And I learned some interesting things there. The worst thing you could do is be on a podcast and drink a fucking effervescent cocktail, because now it's going to be a lot of belching. All right. So he leaves Pennsylvania. For whatever reason. Let's say it's the little boy that died because he accidentally, you know, took some medicine or died from some medicine that was given to him at the pharmacy. But then he moves to Chicago in 1886. So at 26, he ends up there. And now he's no longer Herman Webster Mudgett. He is Henry Howard Holmes. Now, I know a lot of you all are doing your laundry and driving into work, so you can't write all the aliases down. I'm going to try my damnedest to keep it real straight for you, okay? Henry Howard Holmes. Now, it's likely that Holmes preferred Chicago because it was like a hustling city. I mean, according to Larson, the city was growing in all available directions. This is a direct quote from him. And he said, where it abutted the lake, it grew skyward, sharply increasing the value of land within the loop. Now, Inglewood was considered a streetcar suburb where stockyard workers chose to settle. The suburb was a part of the town of Lake at that time and was one of the many areas adjacent to the stockyards. So they would take trains and streetcars to work. And literally, like, first of all, the place smelled like holy hell. There was one dude, there was one quote where they said they would take the trains and streetcars to work and congratulated themselves on living upwind of the stockyard. According to the Chicago Sun-Times, or I'm sorry, I just made that up. It was the Chicago Tribune. Among the most potent odors recorded was the Union stockyards. And for more than 100 years, ending in early 1970s, the stockyards cast over the city a pungent cloud of decay, which could sometimes reach the loop. So there was this quote from this Upton Sinclair book in 1906 called The Jungle. And this is what he said about the stockyards. Quote, it was an elemental odor, raw and crude. It was rich, almost rancid, sensual and strong. There were some who drank it in as if it were an intoxicant. There were others who put their handkerchiefs to their faces. The new immigrants were still tasting it, lost in wonder when suddenly the car came to a halt and the door flung open and a voice shouted, "Stockyards!" Yep. I'm an actress too. So a historian, I read this article in the Chicago Magazine and there was a quote from this historian by the name of Dominic Pasiga. He was the author of a book called Slaughterhouse Chicago's Union Stockyard and the World It Made. Back of the Yards is like a neighborhood that's adjacent to, obviously, the stockyards. And so he's from there. And he was also a Union Stockyard employee from 1969 until their closure 2 years later in 1971. Now, Pasiga said in 1890, 1 out of every 4 Chicagoans were dependent on the meatpacking industry for their income. 500,000 people a year visited the stockyards. They came to see the killing, so everybody knew how to kill an animal if you grew up on a farm. As early as the 1850s, neighbors to the west and the south would be called back of the yards. Now, a little Chicago history. In The Devil in the White City, Max Weber said that Chicago was like a human being with his skin removed, which, yikes, gives me Hellraiser, gives me Hellraiser, that scene where Frank is living in the attic and he has no skin, that's what that's giving me. So every time I read that quote, I think of Frank from Hellraiser. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch it. Now, as Chicago at that time was rebuilding from the 1871 Chicago fire, so it was, there was a lot of industry happening. I mean, this was the Gilded Age anyway. So the Carnegies and the Rockefellers were all doing their thing. But in Chicago, and this was mentioned in The Devil in the White City, Burnham, Root, Olmsted, and Atwood were in the process of creating the Columbian Exposition, which was the 1893 World's Fair. Now, we'll talk about that later, because what's very interesting, too, about H.H. Holmes and the lore around him, when people just give you that brief synopsis of who H.H. Holmes is, it's always the fact that he built a World's Fair hotel that he would, was basically a murder factory where he was killing people and there were acid vats and all this other shit. But the thing is that most of the shit that Holmes did was already done before the fucking first week of the World's Fair. And you'll see what I mean. So let me continue. I'm not going to go off on too many tangents because we got a lot of information. So in 1886, he got this pharmacy in Jesus. In 1886, he got his pharmacy license in Springfield because when he got to Chicago, he realized that he couldn't work in a drugstore without one. So he took this 3-day exam. Now, strange part is, according to a couple of people that apparently knew him and knew of his education and his history, said that he didn't study pharmacy. So who knows how he actually passed that test? To me, he probably cheated. Once we start to learn more and more who he is, you'll say the same thing too. That's just my theory. I mean, he officially gets his license under Henry Howard Holmes. So somewhere in that crazy brain of his, he mustered up the knowledge to pass that that exam. So every now and again, he would sign things under H.W. Mudgett, which, as you remember, was Herman Webster Mudgett. Then he would put at the end alias H.H. Holmes, which is like, that's a little bold. Like, can you just do that? So I want to go back a little bit and talk to you a little bit about the stockyards, because this is one of those wormholes, like what I mentioned in the first episode when I said do not look into fucking state hospitals. This is one of those things that happened to me because I was just trying to really just Google what the parameters were of the stockyards, because I didn't know the exact north, south, east, west streets where it stopped. And then I ended up reading multiple articles on the stockyard. Very interesting history. So in 1864, the yards were basically a major center for meat. The Union Stockyards was a consortium consisted of 9 railroad companies. They were butchering over 2 million animals yearly. Sorry, vegetarians. Sorry. Chicago would eventually become the hog butcher of the world. That's what they called it. So the borders were like this: Halsted to the east, Racine to the west, 39th to the south, and to the north, and 47 to the south. So as the times changed and transportation and distribution had advanced, the stockyards declined and the Union Stockyards closed in the 1970s. So when I was in high school, I used to take the number 9 bus to my high school that was in, borderline West Loop. And I was riding the bus through not the stockyard, but the street that was just west, which was Ashland. So I found this quote and maybe this was the smell that I was smelling, because when I tell you the smell of that shit, ain't nothing like you ever smelled before. And I'm going to tell you too, that in recent years, because my favorite Baskin Robbins is over there, in recent years, I have been over there. And it don't smell like that, for real no more. So they've done some major work. But I did find this quote: Pure Foods was a pork packing facility built in 1925 at the corner of 46th Street and Bishop to be close to the millions of pigs herded each year through the stockyard gates. The packing house outlived the stockyards, continuing to process pig carcasses into pickled pig's feet and bacon until 2007. When it abruptly shut down after a merger with an Indiana meatpacking company. Now, I graduated in 2004. I think these motherfuckers was what I was smelling, because it was bad. It was bad. So back to Holmes. On brand, Holmes created an elaborate tale about Clara. You remember Clara? Clara's Holmes's wife. He was trying to divorce her. And he had this shitty attorney by the name of Wharton Plummer. Now, all of his other attorneys thought that this dude was a shit starter. They were like, I am not working with him. I can't keep him out of trouble. He is never stopping. So, but this Wharton Plummer gentleman, you'll hear his name again because he actually comes up and continues to work with Holmes. Now, he basically says that she was having an affair with a J.M. Downer. That was the name. And that he takes care of their son, who at the time was 6 years old. Now, there's no record of Robert ever visiting or living with his father. He tries to take care of the kid for a month and then returns it to Clara. That's not you taking care of your child. I'm sorry. I hate to break it to you. Now, it's possible that he took the child for 1 month in order to file for divorce first. So, he's going to go to the divorce, to file the paperwork with this child, acting like he's the sole parent. And then that way she wouldn't be able to get alimony or retain custody of their son, which is very happy he didn't retain custody of Robert, because Robert will probably be dead. So also, there is no record of a J.M. Downer. He never gave money for child support or any support. And the divorce kind of just poof, vanished. Now, this was the last time he used his name. Clara and Levi said that, and remember, Levi is HH's father, said that Mudgett returned in 1888 and he was telling them of plans of setting up shop in Chicago. So he then did this weird thing where he wrote his brother from New York, and it was on like New York hotel stationery paper, asking him to come, but the brother couldn't come. So after that, Herman just kind of fell off the face of the earth. Clara waited for 1 year, and then she went back to making dresses. She was like, fuck this. I ain't got time. This dude's a fool. I'm not divorcing you, though, because whatever money you make, I want it to be mine. But the family basically just took him for dead. They were like, whatever. Where is he? Don't know. Don't care. Meanwhile, it's likely he was quickly rushing through the divorce because, why? He got fucking married again. Around that time, he somehow ends up in Minneapolis. And then while he's in Minneapolis, he's like, I guess, fucking around with different women, of course. And that's where he finds Myrta Belknap. This is where she enters the chat. Who he married while he's still married to Clara. So Myrta kind of just pumps oxygen into this already raging fire. And she was about a year younger than him. So there's no concrete date on when they were actually married, but historians believe it was around January of 1887. Now, there's no proof either of their marriage actually being official. There are property records that indicate that she was in fact married to Holmes, as she took his last name. And this bitch is on the property record. Like, she's on the property record for the land at 701 through 703 63rd Street in Inglewood, which is the castle. So Myrta's funky story may have gone something like this. She was messing with this dude by the name of Harry Graham, who boarded with her family in 1886. By the way, Holmes also boarded with her family. He left to visit relatives and disappeared. Now, Myrta traveled to New York to see what was going on and found out that Graham may have been, quote, made away with for his life insurance, and she was now engaged to a new man, and his name was Harry Howard Holmes. Now, the people that worked with Myrta at this music store didn't think that Holmes was Graham, partly because they didn't feel like they bore any resemblance, and it was believed that, according to her coworker, she first met Holmes in Rochester, New York. But Graham, she met in Minneapolis. Now, even though Holmes could have worn a disguise, because apparently this motherfucker used to do that, it's not confirmed whether or not Holmes was Graham or if Holmes was involved in the insurance scheme story. So she may have come up with that on her own. But it's unlikely that Holmes would be able to play two characters. I mean, he's just not that good. So Myrta's father told the papers later that Myrta met Holmes while he was working for a druggist in Minneapolis. And Myrta's friend, Kate Durkee, remember her name because this bitch keep coming up too, said that Myrta met Holmes in 1886 in Minneapolis as well. Now, my theory, since the storekeeper claims Myrta met Holmes in New York, I wonder if it was that time when Holmes was dropping that other barrel off in New York. Because I don't know if you remember from part one, but in part one, Holmes does that insurance scam and he has to go to, New York. He ends up going to Chicago to find his portion of the insurance scam, which is basically a probably terribly decomposed or damaged body. And he had a barrel, one that he took to Chicago. Well, he had two barrels, and then one of them he took to New York. But then it made me think, I'm like, is this when he went to New York when he met Myrta? I don't know, but I wasn't there. I'm just saying. It's weird that he was, quote, made away with for his insurance. And then she goes off and becomes engaged to a con man who was just a part of a life insurance scam. I'm sorry. Like, it's just too big of a coincidence. Now, It could be that Holmes made up the story for her because he would do shit like that. But if he did, that would definitely mean that Murda was well aware of his criminal behavior and possibly knew how dangerous he could be. So Murda's parents would eventually buy a house in Wilmette and live there with Lucy, which is like, okay, that's weird. You know, it's like, again, he's doing the same shit he did with Clara. He keeps having these fucking kids and wives and shit and just leaving them off, you know, in a whole nother house somewhere else. Anyway, so eventually Holmes he would work at this drugstore called E.S. Holton Drugs, which was a pharmacy that most people in Holmes lore say that it was owned by an elderly couple, and that the husband was ill and was dying while the wife was left in charge of the business. Now, Holmes walked in looking for work, but according to Holmes, he was looking for work in July of 1886 and ended up working with the Holtons. Now, at some point, he ends up buying the drugstore. Now, that's after, you know, a bunch of other shit happens. Now, accounts reference him stealing stock and fixtures one by one to mortgage off so he could raise capital. And then he would agree to pay the loan off at $100 per month, which is like, if you know this bastard, he ain't paying shit. According to Seltzer, there's really no evidence of this being true. So E.S. Holton was likely actually a young female doctor who was actually named Elizabeth Sarah. The 1886 medical directory shows an E.S. Holton as Elizabeth Sarah, and she was in her 20s. She also went to the University of Michigan, which is where Holmes went, and graduated a year before Holmes did. So it's possible that, you know, maybe she arranged to sell the pharmacy when she was pregnant in 1887, when she was having her second child. You know, that maybe that's how he ended up, you know, buying it. It's also believed that Holmes never swindled Elizabeth. My thing is it because he respected her? Because she was like a businesswoman, you know, in the 1880s. She did have her own pharmacy. She was a graduate of his alma mater. Maybe there was a certain level of respect there. And there was also no record of a lawsuit between them. So, you know, there's something about E.S. Holton, you know, that if it was this woman, Elizabeth Sarah, that Holmes respected. Now, the Elizabeth Sarah story feels right. I mean, what the fuck do I know? But my theory is this. Holmes got a job at a drugstore owned by a fellow alum. She got pregnant. He bought the pharmacy off of her after her second pregnancy. He made up the whole old people story to add a little spice to it and make himself sound like he swindled two elderly people instead of the fact that he submitted to a fucking woman. You know what I mean? Like, this dude, in the way his ego works, like, I'm just wondering if he created that old people story to kind of restore his power by eliminating the real story, which was that, hey, I bought into a pharmacy with this woman, and I respected her and I paid her money. I paid her the money. So I think there's that. And he, you know, it's on record. He has a small penis. So, I mean, whatever. So by 1887, he's running the drugstore and building on the property across the street, known infamously as the Murder Castle. Now, building this castle, it's a lot. I mean, there were talks about the World's Fair starting, and, you know, all of those heavy hitters around 1891, 1892 were 100% like, we need to put Chicago on the map and get the World's Fair. Now, Holmes knew that the town was growing at an alarming rate, and prosperity was everywhere. People would flock, you know, to the city for jobs, and they would have to find an, affordable place to live. And I think that for him, he was like, yeah, I know what I'm going to do. Now, you say, Brittany, didn't you just say he didn't build the World's Fair to kill people? Yeah, I'm still saying that. Watch. So it was designed in March 1887. Now, the building took 1.5 years to build. Now, it's likely that it was because he spent so much time finessing creditors, because he would like constantly swap out contractors. And according to Schechter's book, quote, most of them were fired after a week or two, and others lasted only a few days before they were replaced. So there had been over 500 laborers on the project. He bought everything on credit under the alias H.S. Campbell. The castle seemed to be more, to me, like a fraud than any fraud he ever committed. So it's more like a sideshow attraction. And it's a cash out, because if some shit pop off, he's like, I'm gonna set this shit on fire, because he had like 3 insurance policies out on it. According to Seltzer, a policy was taken out with the Queen Insurance Company in October. Weeks later, another policy was bought out for Gerard Fire and Marine Insurance. A policy from Liverpool, London, and Globe followed, until fire at the building would result in a payout of several $1,000s, far more than he probably stood to make running a legitimate fucking hotel. Which to me says a lot. I think that the castle itself was an insurance policy. And by 1892, everybody named Mama was suing him. He would also claim that, he would have these moments where he would claim that the work was so substandard that like paying would just not be an option. It was like he wouldn't pay for work that was performed at all. And it's also believed that he swapped so many workers so they wouldn't really notice what he was doing in the building and what he was creating. Because don't get me wrong, some of that shit was weird. Now, at this time, Holmes hired Benjamin Pitezel, who was likely Holmes's muscle, as well as his assistant. He may have been the reason why Holmes got away with so much, because Pitezel was supposedly like this big dude, like of big stature. And so when Pitezel's kind of, mentioned throughout the story, you're like, yeah, okay, he's probably just, kind of like his brain dead muscle. And we'll talk about Benjamin Pitezel earlier, because there's a pretty sad story about him. Now, the first floor the whole first floor was storefronts. Some were owned by Holmes, others were leased. It was like a jewelry store, a candy store, there was like a barber shop. So he had like the whole first floor as storefronts. Now, eventually, because he also had a restaurant in there, eventually he would have to sell the restaurant portion to this guy named Clarence Phillips. But Phillips was also the guy who did plumbing, and he did handiwork around the castle. There was also this handyman around the castle that was named Patrick Quinlan, who kept coming up. Like, he comes up a lot too. Benjamin Pitezel, Patrick Quinlan, Phillips doesn't really come up again, but there are repeat players here. Now, the second floor was apartments. One famous story was that when, because he had his apartment up there, and then he had other apartments up there, and then there was like his office and all this other shit. And he had this safe in his office. Now, of course, he didn't pay for the safe. So they came back and they were going to repossess the safe. But he had the safe built into a wall. And when they came to repossess it, he threatened to sue if they damaged the wall. He was like, yeah, you can take it, but you fuck up this wall, I'm going to sue you. And they never repossessed the safe. So there's that. The workers were paid, but the companies weren't. So he was notorious for pretending like they did subpar work. And that is how he avoided the bill. Then 5 years later, a third floor was to be built for hotel rooms. Now, this is around the time of the World's Fair. This was his brilliant idea. Because remember, the first floor was storefronts. The second floor was just apartments. So 5 years later, when there's talks of the World's Fair, he's thinking this would be lucrative. So he attempts to create hotel rooms on the third floor, but it turned out to just be a dump and it was shabby. But this is the effort that he put into capitalizing off the World's Fair. But that was 5 years after he opened the castle. So that notion that Holmes built the castle specifically for the fair is just not true. He was planning to do something weird well before that. Now, once done with the first 2 floors, mind you, he still hadn't paid anything. And when they tried to retrieve the goods, this fool sold or hid the furniture so they couldn't repossess it. Now, he would sometimes hide them in like this room where the door was like covered in wallpaper. And they even found shit in like the ceiling. They found furniture in where the new third floor was, and in between the second floor. They found it in the ceiling. And he hired this man by the name of Doyle. So he helped build the third floor. And I'm wondering if he was just like, why are we building all this? Like, what is this for? Because I ain't doing a good job. Now, Ben Pitezel tried to get Clarence Phillips, remember the new owner of this restaurant, to sell the restaurant back to Holmes. It's obvious to me that Holmes' crimes are starting to escape him. I mean, he's in need of cash, and he's like, I got to do something because everybody's coming after me. So they twist Phillips' arm, and he ends up basically ruined. Holmes increased his rent, and the furniture that he had in his restaurant was repossessed. It turns out the Campbell Yates Company didn't even have a title to it, and Campbell Yates Company was Holmes's company. So Holmes was in trouble in Chicago. I mean, things were working out and, but then there was a moment where things were just like snowballing. Like all of his crimes were starting to just overwhelm him. And most of his creditors are now just raiding the castle all the time to retrieve the goods. Now, he was trying to build the third floor, but it was a dump and the construction was poor. And they found all the hidden rooms where he was hiding furniture, and it ended up in the papers. So he tries to get someone else to take over the building. Now, the new owners noticed something was wrong when every day vacant rooms would mysteriously have pieces of furniture in them that weren't there before. And when Phillips told the new owners that Holmes was a con man, they tried to meet with Holmes, but he never showed up. So the new operators pulled out and took their furniture with them, and they never paid off the promissory note. And when Holmes used the note as security for another loan he never paid, they got dragged into a lawsuit, which I'm like, why y'all keep doing so much business with this piece of shit? Why do you keep doing so much business with him? Now, rooms were completed by 1893, and the fair had already started. It was never really a hotel. I mean, according to Seltzer, there was no lobby. All the things that would technically make it a hotel, it really wasn't a hotel. In 1893, he had built also this weird asbestos safe that he would use as an office, which, I mean, could that be why you were progressively getting crazier? Because you were just chilling in asbestos all day? Mesothelioma much? So, the man that built that safe was this guy named Joe Owens, who ended up replacing Minnie Williams as secretary. We'll talk about her later. In August of 1893, a fire broke out, and one of the tenants thought Holmes did it. Quote, the tenant said, Holmes was at work on the third floor of the building, moving things out. And that afternoon at 5 o'clock, he took the train for Wilmette. Soon after he left, there was noticeable in the flats on the third floor a strong odor of burning tar, and soon tar began to run down the wall into the closet below. During the days pending the fire, Holmes had all the furniture of Mrs. Connor, we'll talk about her, removed and sent to Wilmette. His books, papers, valuables were taken out. He and Quinlan took off all the door fixtures, knobs, and locks on the third floor. Also, a $75 porcelain bathtub and all marble basins. It was generally believed that around the building that Holmes set fire to the building, and he himself said that it was the work of an incendiary. He said someone set fire to the building but did not know who did it. I remember his actions and feel sure he knew who did it. Now, everybody knew that fire was set, for the insurance money. So that's the thing. That is a brief synopsis of the birth and the death of the murder castle, but there's so much that happened in between. So let's talk about his scams. Now, this man was not a one-trick pony, but his favorite con was buying on credit and selling them for cash without paying the original bill. He would rent bicycles and sell them instead of returning them. He did the same with music boxes. That's why we're drinking the bicycle thief. Get it? So Murda's mom, remember Murda? Her mom, Lucy, was also mixed up in his lawsuits. because she was always listed as the owner on like a bunch of his properties, even though she didn't know any of Holmes's business dealings. He would even claim to be a power of attorney and start signing papers for her. Now, there's no guarantee that she knew of how many people were suing her. This worked for him because if he was pursued, he'd just say the owners, or he would just say like, contact the owners and avoid any of the liability. Now, Holmes had also, and this is just a fun fact, he had a large collection of fake beards. To me, that's a very important fact. That's a very important fact. A large collection of fake beards. Like, I had to know that. Now, he had possibly over 60 lawsuits during the 8 years he spent in Chicago. Now, this, mind you, and I take back the fact that he's a fucking Chicago local, because he ain't. He was born in New Hampshire. He hopped around all over the place, and he only lived in Chicago for 8 years. Man was only alive for 35. So majority of his life, he was not in Chicago. So I take that back. He is not a local. So Holmes was, since he was so well known for never paying shit back, this was just like his consistent scam. He once lied about creating this gas generator, though, which was pretty creative, actually. He said that this gas generator would turn water into gas. Now, the device was popular, and the Lake Gas Company looked into it and offered him $2,500 for it. It was, quote, the gas out of our own mains. He was showing off the entire time. He claimed that he purchased the gas machine to generate gas from water to avoid paying the gas company, which is probably a lie. I'm just saying. He eventually had to pay the company once he was caught, but he would later say that he made money off the selling of the device. Who knows what's true? He also said one time that he created an artesian well, which is also a scam. He would say that he was selling mineral water called the Linden Grove mineral water. And this was supposed to be, I guess, the closest he ever got to patent medicine, because he never, ever gets close to patent medicine. In the Tribune, they said that the good old lake water from the pipes was discolored and sold as readily as mineral. He got away with this scam for 2 years, though. It's also likely that, like the gas, he was still siphoning water from the water's mains, which is like, wow, from the city's mains. Because, whatever, we used to steal cable. Now, according to Seltzer, it's also likely that Holmes sold the pharmacy more than once. There's an instance where Holmes sold to this guy named Ned Connor in 1890, and again to this guy named A.L. Jones in 1891. He started having people buy items in the store to kind of give off the impression that the store was profitable. That's what he would do to like raise the profits. And then he would do the same shit he did in the hotel, where he would just, hide merchandise in spaces upstairs to avoid them being repossessed. Eventually, the last owner, A.L. Jones, sold it to a Dr. Edward, or I said the last owner, and then I said he sold it. I guess he'd be the third owner, A.L. Jones, eventually sold it to this guy named Dr. Edward H. Robinson, who ran the drugstore for the rest of Holmes's Chicago years. Now, by 1890, Holmes had already started another business, the Warner Glass Bending Company. He didn't know how to bend glass. He would then pretend like he created a bending technique using his furnace in the basement in the castle. And the company was likely named after a L.W. Warner, who helped sell furniture for Holmes. He told Holmes that he was going to take out a patent in his name. I mean, he told L.W. Warner that he was going to take a patent out in his name, which he never did, but instead announced the name of the company that he opened in the Loop, which was basically named after that dude. This could have been a ruse to create a larger furnace, because he had workers go down and like every now and again check glass to see if it was bent. And then after that, the machine was considered a success. So he lined up investors, finesse, and then he would continue to build large furnaces, even though he never bent any glass. And he would also continue to get investors to invest in it. All these people are stupid. I can't even get over the level of it's like I said in the last episode that he was really smart. And I don't know if he was really smart or if these other people are just really stupid because, and I know that we're talking about a time where like the city was rebuilding itself and so many people were desperate for, just success and profit and industry and blah, blah, blah. But come the fuck on. I mean, Jesus Christ. You got this man. This man he got multiple names. He's using your name. He putting your name on shit. You getting sued for stuff you don't even know about it. Like, this is just a lot. He got businesses that don't even have accounts with people that are actually buying any of his services. He's, he built a building where he's just constantly putting strangers' names on the titles to just pretend as if they own it. So if anybody ever comes to him, and then my thing is this, Adam Seltzer is able to fucking look in papers and records. You motherfuckers knew that this dude was a crook and you let him crook you. Like, come on. You played yourself. I ain't even mad at H.H. Holmes. I'm mad at you. So anyway, I got aggressive. Now, by 1891, Holmes started with the ABC Copier Company. Holmes was on it as secretary, and Plummer, Wharton Plummer, his janky-ass lawyer, was on it as vice president. Now, 5 years after Clara divorce attempt, because it is not even, people don't even know if this motherfucking Wharton Plummer even knows that this is the same dude, because he works with him a lot. But he may, I mean, that may have also been the connection. Now, 5 years after the divorce attempt, the janky lawyer ends up working with Holmes again, ends up vice president on Holmes's company, the ABC Copier Company. The company was originally created in 1890 by this dude named Frederick Nin, who purchased the patent for a copier for writings and drawings. And then Nin convinced a man named Thomas Bryan, the commissioner of the World's Fair, by the way, to invest. And they opened the company. Now, Holmes ended up buying the shares from Bryan for $9,000. But when it was time to pay Holmes, he just produced a promissory note instead of money. And Bryan did not want to be associated with the company. He didn't want to be on the title. He didn't want to get, to have his name used as credit. And Holmes did all that shit. Another man, though, quoted that Holmes said that Bryan would be good fruit for a sucker, which I was like, wow, if I didn't have fucking, memory loss issues, I would remember that enough to use it, because I like that one. Good fruit for a sucker. Now, he never paid Bryan back and took out tons of credit in his name. Turns out he was only using the company to rip off investors. I mean, he got caught in a scam of like selling territories. So he would allow other people to sell the copier. So like, let's say, for example, it's kind of like what we know from drug culture, right? Like crack selling. So basically, let's say, I don't know, you want to sell these copiers in Jersey. He'll sell the license, or in a certain part of Jersey. He will double your he will basically rip off those people by selling the territory that you already bought. And so now you got to compete with other people, because at the end of the day, he was not loyal to anyone. And it doesn't sound like anybody ever signed any real contracts with him. But he never really sold copiers. So there's, I don't know if you were expecting that or not, but he never really sold copiers. Now, he did have a beef with this dude named William Green. And William Green was with William Green and Co., very creative, which was a cement company. And since he never paid them back, they broke into Kate Durkee, who is, again, Murda's friend, broke into Kate Durkee's apartment in the castle and stole boilers and just like other, random shit they just stole. So lies, though, because like Kate didn't even live there. She didn't even live in the city. So Holmes had placed her on the deed, and like an idiot, she went along with it under the auspices that she would make money on it. Now, Green knew that Holmes was a con man. William Green, he knew that he was a con man because it's believed that he was also conning with Holmes in the past. So he knew the con, but there's no honor amongst thieves. So I don't know why he thought that was going to work out. Now, Kate Durkee would later come up a lot since she's on 7 of Holmes's fake companies. I mean, she later sued for William Green, for that William Green break-in in 1891. It was also interrogated for being the owner of the drugstore company that was being sued for non-payment. She gets question and says that she thought Lucy Belknap is Murda's mom, took care of the transfer of ownership, which is like, wow. Then said that she sold the company to a H.S. Campbell. Again, never bringing up Mr. Holmes directly. So the more they questioned her after that, the less she said. She was not ratting. That bitch didn't say nothing. So now let's get into some of these murders, because there's going to be some more conning, but there's going to be some death too. So let's talk about the first few victims. It started to become apparent that H.H. Holmes wasn't as prolific as the legend wants him to be. I mean, there's obviously rumors of him killing people when he was younger, but there's also the possibility that Holmes' body count went up only because people wanted it to be even more of him to be even more of a terrible monster than he already was. And especially after he was already arrested for murder. I mean, it's one of those moments. The court of public opinion is not useful. And really, people drop dimes just to get in the news. So if we're being honest, I mean, we see it now. It's just digital. Is Holmes a prolific serial killer? I mean, I've read worse. I've read about worse. I mean, time plays a big factor in this, like the time period. I mean, people have never seen anything like this shit before. And of course, it would seem terrible to people that barely have electricity. But it's just a fucking old case. So papers are making shit up to sell papers. People are just saying shit to the police and to the media just to be known. I mean, you have a man who's a pathological liar, and willing to tell all these elaborate tales when only 40% of them can be verified. I mean, I don't really know the statistic, but I'm making one up. And everybody in this time is fucking bored. What else was there to do? So anyway, the victims. It's not really understood how many people Holmes killed. I mean, no one will ever figure it out. It's impossible. We do know that he was suspected of killing people in the past. We do know that people suspected that one day he did kill people, period. And as the record shows us, we do know that he did not value human life. At best, he looked at human beings as objects or subjects that was, experimented on for the sake of his own reward. But this is beyond narcissism. And it's obvious that Holmes used people a lot. It's my guess that he simply disposed of all of them when he was done with them. And killing them may have been the most effective method to do it. Because, according to Seltzer, the murders weren't simply a love of bloodshed, but a necessary part of furthering his swindling operations and protecting his lifestyle. I mean, I think that the articulating skeleton shit, if he was ever grave digging or grave robbing for that shit, same thing. I think he literally was just like, nah, I just deal in bodies. And when I'm sick of somebody and I need to get rid of them, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of them. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it. I'm just saying, I think that's how he did it. Now, it's believed that on Christmas in 1891, Holmes killed his first victim. There was a man by the name of Ned Connor. Ned was running around, looking for work when he and his family moved to Chicago in 1889 from Iowa. He was told that the man that he should look for was in Chicago, and his name was Holmes. So he goes to him. Holmes gives him a job, first in a jewelry store, then in a drugstore. Now, eventually, Ned ends up taking out a bunch of loans for Holmes. What's also weird is that Ned even knows about the secret passageways and all this other shit, the little cubby. He just thought that Holmes was weird. He thought he was eccentric. And he noticed that he was incredibly into chicks. And one chick he was particularly interested in was, ding, 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 Ned's own fucking wife. Holmes was courting women all the time. And Julie Connor, Ned's wife, was literally no exception. Mind you, Ned and Julie, her maiden name's Julie Smythe, also had a daughter named Pearl. And I thought it was so adorable. The grandmother had said that Pearl used to wear a little gold watch and a ring with a small diamond in it. I mean, it's like Pearl sounds mad fly. And I love babies that wear jewelry. I mean, I was a baby that wore jewelry. My ears were pierced and I wore a bracelet. Seriously. So to this day, I over-accessorize like a mug. But anyway, so now Holmes is a predator. He was just known to woo women and hire women as clerks. But Holmes, to me, noticed that Ned and Julie were not doing so well. And apparently they started to fight as soon as they moved into the castle. Oh yeah, they live in the fucking castle. So let me think about this. You have a husband that cannot take care of you and is submitting to an ego like Holmes for a job. You may already be unhappy. But unless she already has a history of cheating, it's likely that she became attracted to Holmes quickly and comfortably because she has zero respect for her husband. I mean, it's not hard. I mean, you look at your husband submitting to another man like this, it's like, shit, well, then I might as well be messing with him. Why am I messing with you? I mean, I hate to say it, but I think that that's how women look at it. But anyway, this isn't a reality show podcast. But according to Ned, Holmes had pretended like he was trying to keep the peace, and he really was trying to get a peace. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't trying to keep the peace. And what's wrong with me? So eventually Holmes hired Julie as a cashier. Ned is mad weak. I just can't get over. He said that he would notice that when he was in the store and Holmes got attention from other women or vice versa, that he would have an issue with Julie later. Okay. If that is not the biggest sign that a motherfucker is into somebody else, I do not know what is. You gonna take it out on me? So at this point, he realizes it's over. They both realize it's over. And I'm happy it's over because I have secondhand embarrassment. This is a lot. This is kind of pathetic. So Holmes told Ned that Julie once threatened to kill herself. Excuse me, were you just supposed to have a relationship powwow with me after you've been fucking my wife? Like, this is just like way painful. You are sleeping with my wife and you want to have a relationship powwow with me? So he even he even mentions that like of course these papers and shit like that are like, they're way too proper to actually say what he said. But apparently Holmes would like say shit to Ned that only a person that was sleeping with Julie would know. And I'm like, now Ned, you gotta feel around down there, see if your balls are still there. So Ned and Murda knew of the affair between Holmes and Julia. I mean, Julia and Holmes, and I'm going to say Julie sometimes, because sometimes my tongue just don't feel like saying it's rude, but it's just facts. Julia and Holmes got messy. And they were having an affair under the same roof. They were all living in the hotel at this time. Now, also, feels like Holmes was bragging about his relationship to Ned. And like I said, he was making those comments about Julie and making it obvious that he was sleeping with her. I mean, Holmes, though, had the nerve to get mad at Ned when he decided to leave this shit show. He was like, how dare you? And Ned was like, I got the fuck up out of here. Like, you just basically taking my life. And so Holmes contacted Ned's new employer. He took out a promissory note for $3,000 payable to the employer and never paid him back. What is wrong with him? Like, what is this about? Now, this is such a stupid, petty, schoolhouse ass move. And of course he gets sued and just ignores the goddamn suit. I'm like, why does anybody sue anybody? This is just so ghetto. Then at some point in 1890, the fool gave Julie a promissory note to become part of the store. He had a knack for making employees pay him on the pretenses that he would make them owner. I'm like, what a dick. So Holmes then sued her, acting as a representative of William Green for the balance. Now, Seltzer thinks it was to stall the William Green and Co. lawsuit. Now, Herta's ass knew about the suit, and Holmes told her it was like a paper thing. We're just transferring funds between, each other, type shit. Now, that led to a lot of arguing. While all of this weird shit is going on, Holmes moves his family out of the house, and he's like, this is getting nasty and they're distracting. I'm going to move them to 71st and Honorary, which turns out I lived on 71st and Honorary. I had a brief stint there. My grandfather owned a building. Now, meanwhile, Ned's weak tail. Meanwhile, Ned's weak ass is still running cons with Holmes, even though he basically ruined his marriage and even throws his own sister Gertie to Holmes. Gertie was the second child of Ned's. The second chick of Ned's that Holmes would shoot his fucking shot at. I mean, Holmes ended up hiring her. And, he typically hires women that he wants to keep around so he can prey on them. So eventually Holmes plans to send Gertie to school and pay part of her tuition. She gets to school and falls in love with someone new. Now, he built her up only for her to break his heart. Holmes did not like this new motherfucker, which, the unmitigated gall. Like, really, conveniently, Gertie dies. So you're probably like, how did she die? She was young. Yeah, she died of heart failure at 22. After going to school on Holmes's dime, falls in love with another man. She gets a suggestion from Holmes to return back to home to stay away from the dude, only to return to Iowa, where she dies from heart disease, which, apparently she had the whole time. By the way, she was the one who received a letter to come back home because her mother was dead, but she was the one that ended up dying. That doesn't really smell right to me. Also, Gertie's death was ruled a heart disease. I don't know how motherfuckers used to eat back then. Maybe it was like, anatomical defect. I don't know. But the sources had claimed that the tissue, I cannot read. The sources had claimed that the issue with her, was her heart. And it had been her heart. And my thing is, like, don't some poisons, don't they cause heart failure? But I don't know. Who am I? Did they have toxicology? Maybe they did. I don't know. So the dude Gertie was messing with told Ned that Gertie wanted to stop working for Holmes because he proposed to her and she felt disrespected and told him that she wasn't that kind of person, which is like, hell yeah, Gertie. It's like, you coming up to me talking about, yeah, by the way, let's get married. I don't know. I'm not that's not me. Like, that's not me. And so there, I think she created a problem. I think at that moment she created a problem. He even says that there had even been instances of Holmes making smart comments about I keep calling this woman Gertie's death. Well, no, this is like a comment he would make. He would say, well, no, I'll just tell you that she never died of heart disease. There's a little love story mixed up in that, but nobody will ever know about it. Oh God. Go to hell. Now, apparently Holmes had a loan that was outstanding with Ned and was simultaneously sleeping with Julia. And then finally Ned just snaps. So Holmes says, "Connor, I've always treated you as a brother. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." And Ned is like, "Holmes, you never intended to treat me fairly. You have never paid me. And what does he say? You have had the money time and time again. And if I ever get $1 out of you, I would consider it the same as finding it." Which I'm like, that's definitely how you get to him. The fuck? Ned, you couldn't think of anything more harsh to say than that. This man just took your life, has been fucking your wife. He's signing you on to menial tasks and putting you on properties and shit and making it hard for you to live your life. And you just sitting here like, and if I ever got $1 out of you, I would consider it the same as finding it. Bruh. I don't hear no motherfuckers. I don't hear no bitches. You could have called him a pussy. There's just so much you could have just did there. But anyway, after the Ned debacle, he's in the streets swindling left and right. He has this company now called the Chicago Intermediate Company that he basically created after he created the ABC Copier Company. There were hardly any employees there, but basically he was like hustling stolen goods out of the building in the loop for cash. And his sister, Mary Kelly, who comes up a lot in the Holmes' story, was working there and was sure that he used her name to start the company. She was right. She was right. And her name was on the paperwork, but her name was on the paperwork as Mary Durkee, which is a hybrid name of Kate Durkee and Mary Kelly. This fucking dude. So a list of the companies announced in the Trib that same day, that was December 16th, 1891, Interocean, Chicago Carnival Amusement, who was also on there, Warden Plummer, and D&C Holdback Company. Now, Patrick Quinlan, another Holmes cohort, said that Holmes, Julia, and Pearl visited him and his farm in Licata, Michigan on the 4th of July in 1891. That Christmas, when Patrick returned to the farm, his daughter asked about Julia and Pearl. Now, Patrick shared that Julia had gone off to California to get married. I don't think any of us think that that's true. But Christmas was the last time anyone saw Pearl or Julia. Yeah. Now, a renter at Holmes' building said that Julia told him that she was going to Davenport to visit her sister who was about to get married. On Christmas Eve, Julia was decorating for the kids. Now, the renter said, quote, her daughter had been presented with a doll, which Mrs. Connor said Pearl could take with her. She said she did not intend taking anything with her, but the clothes she needed for a hurried trip, and would leave her silverware and other things wrapped in clothes in the bureau. She left our rooms late in the night, bidding us the usual goodbye, and talked of what she would do on Christmas Day, saying nothing to cause us to think she intended going away that night. She even left the dinner dishes on the table. Well, the next day, she did not come into our flat, and at 10 o'clock, we went downstairs to visit friends. We got back at 11 o'clock that evening, but never saw Mrs. Connor or Pearl again. She must have left the house sometime after midnight, Christmas Eve, or in the daytime after we left the house. Nobody seemed to know where she had gone. Now, the renter's wife saw Julia that Christmas morning and never saw her again. Later, she thought she had come back, but what she heard was the footsteps of the new tenants. Now, it's hard to tell how much time had passed, but the Doyles, the new tenants, moved in May 1892. When Holmes took people into the space, their shit was still there. Quote, when Holmes took us in to look at it, which is the room, it presented a remarkable appearance. In the dining room, the table was standing untouched after a meal, fried eggs, bread, bacon, honey, and other things. The strangest sight was in the dining room. On the floor and chairs was the clothing of Mrs. Connor and her child. A doll was lying on the floor, and Holmes quickly shoved it under the bed with his foot. The bed had been used since the last time it was the bed had been used since the last time it was made up. On the dresser were neatly arranged a lot of toilet articles, comb, brushes, powder box, other things. The minute I saw them, I felt that there was something wrong somewhere. Holmes had told us that Mrs. Connor had left suddenly on the receipt of a telegram saying that her sister was dying in Davenport. It occurred to me instantly that no woman would leave for a trip, however suddenly, without taking at least some of the toilet articles, which were on the dresser, for they were indispensable to her. We found the bureau drawers filled with Mrs. Connor's clothes of every kind, and it was all neatly and smoothly put away. The order in which everything of hers was, except the clothing she had taken off before retiring, made me believe from the first, the story of Holmes, that she had suddenly gone to Davenport. Even more fucked up, though. Holmes had offered the Doyles Julia's clothes. And when Mrs. Doyle said no, he sent them to Wilmette, presumably to Myrta, who is currently living in Wilmette with Lucy. That's Holmes's fucking daughter. This dude is so sick. Now, a lot of firsthand accounts are coming in 3 years after the fact. So again, hard to tell who's remembering the facts correctly. Now, did I mention one time Holman, oh my God, I'm getting drunk, y'all. One time Holmes sued the woman he was having an affair with. You know who that woman was? Julie. He sued Julia, for non-payment on a loan he paid her to buy into the drugstore. This dude's bitch. Oh my God. So anyway, whatever. So in 1892, Ned's bitch ass writes a letter to Holmes, mad about being dragged into all the bullshit under the plan. To help Pearl, like that. I guess all this shit he was dragging him into, I guess he was like, don't you want to help Pearl? Which is like, wow, you're an idiot. It's believed that by 1892, Julie had already been dead for almost a year. So the story is that Holmes tried to perform an abortion on Julia and she died. Which was obviously super common. Now, while he killed Pearl, is unknown. It could be because she just knew too much. It could be because he was just a selfish piece of shit and a bastard. He would have to kind of get rid of the mother and the child, but it's kind of not understood why he didn't just give Pearl to Ned. Pearl was killed as well. It's likely that she was poisoned and she was only 6, which is very, very sad. Now, according to Devil in the White City, Julia announced that in 1891 she was pregnant and he had asked her to abort the child and only then would he marry her. Now, Julia's kind of trapped at this point, but, pregnancy without marriage was a big deal. It's likely he didn't find it, a respectable thing to do, which is like neither is killing people, but okay, motherfucker. So Erik Larson believes that she was chloroformed to death. And it's possible to me that he really didn't have plans on performing that abortion anyway. Obviously, even though like so many women died from it. And I think, who knows, but I think it could have been an idea he came up with last minute. He was like, shit, why am I performing this abortion? I could just kind of, abort everything. So Ned eventually just moved on with his life. It's like, did he really have a choice? He did end up moving. He had a couple of failed businesses. He moved to the suburbs. He, got the fuck up out of Chicago. Now here's where Emily Sagrand enters the chat. Holmes had this employee at the ABC Copier Company named Emmeline Sagrand. She came to Chicago in 1892. She was looking for work. And Holmes started a franchise called the Silver Ash Institute, which is basically a ripoff version of the Gold Cure. And the Gold Cure was created by this doctor, and it was supposed to treat alcoholism by injecting the patient, as I obviously say this drunk. It was supposed to treat alcoholism by injecting the patient with bichloride of gold 4 times a day. So Holmes had this concoction where instead of gold, he basically used silver, which I'm like, cool. So even the paper knew it was bullshit, though. And it's likely that he hired Emmeline because she had worked at the Institute for that doctor that created the gold cure. So there was that connection. She was also living in the hotel and started messing around with Holmes, pretending like she was his wife. But she was pretending like, like that she was helping out, and like she was helping his wife when she was ill, and acting like they were just like driving around and picking up supplies, and was just like, it's just the oldest trick in the book. It's literally. So Emmeline had called Holmes Mr. Belknap, which is really strange because Belknap is Murda's last name. And we know that men don't take the last names of women. So she would eventually start doing a little digging to see what type of person Holmes was. She was like, oh, what you think of him? And it kind of seems that it didn't matter what the answer was. I mean, she still pursued the relationship, and it could be because maybe she thought that he was rich, he was successful. It's common. I mean, have you ever watched The Gilded Age? Oh, it's on HBO Max. Watch. It is so freaking good. It's so good. But, marrying a successful man is common now for sure, but it was even more important. It was like different type of important then. It's not always about love. Same rules apply here. So Holmes had control over her, though. He was in control of her money. He was in control of where she lived, which is kind of like, this motherfucker's kind of a pimp. He's a pimp. He stayed for a week with she stayed for a week with Mrs. Stanwood, and Stanwood told a Times Herald reporter that, quote, Mr. Grand told me that Mr. Holmes did not want her to board with any person longer than a week. She had $800, which she had earned at Dwight. Holmes borrowed it from her, giving her some real estate as security, which she said was gilt-edged. She was greatly infatuated with Holmes and never ceased talking about him. I did not like him. He could not look one in the face. So he loved bomb her while going around and telling people that she was his cousin. And they were even taking music lessons together. I mean, this is just like, it would be adorable if he wasn't a psychopath. Ned comes back into the picture in 1882 while Emmeline is with Holmes and tries to warn her that Holmes was trash. He's like, yo, like, I don't know why he made that noise, but, hey, well, you should watch it because my wife and daughter both are missing. Now, Holmes confronted him, and he had eventually told him to stay the fuck up out of his business, which respect. Somebody should be watching Holmes, but I do respect him for being like, yo, you need to mind your business. Now, Emmeline's cousin once came to visit, and she told him that she was marrying a Mr. Phelps. So now Emmeline's aware that this man is not using his name quite often. That's a Las Vegas sized warning. Because I'm like, yo, he got a lot of names. Now he's Mr. Phelps. So, of course, she disappears. Now, one doctor saw her last on December 6th in 1892. She was supposed to go visit her parents for the holidays in Indiana. And I think we all see a trend with him. Don't go on trips with Mr. Holmes. You are not coming back. He's like a fucking roach motel. And when Holmes was like asked where she was, he said, oh, she's gone to get married. Now, Mrs. Lawrence was surprised that her close friend hadn't revealed this to her, and noticed that Holmes did not look me in the eye all the time he was talking and seemed anxious to leave. Holmes is real cozy with women leaving him and getting married out of nowhere. This is the worst cover story ever. Like, dude, you keep doing, oh, she just went off to get married. Why everybody keep leaving you and getting married? This man even goes as far as having like wedding notices made and sending them around to her parents. Now, after a while, one witness said that Holmes only answered questions about Emmeline in monosyllables. So that says a lot. She spoke around town about this, like just all of it. And Mrs. Phelps said that he was with her, and that Mr. Phelps said, that he was with her, and that in 1892, Emmeline sent her trunk back home and said that Mr. Phelps was going to buy her new clothes. And her mother also noticed that it was like packed weird, because her mom was like, you sending this trunk back and he's buying you new clothes, but it looks like it was packed by him. Women carefully and like properly packed back then, and it didn't look like a packing any woman would do. Now, it's strange that he used Mr. Belknap, because Adam Seltzer thinks that it's a misspoken account. I think they heard right, because where else would they get the name Belknap at this point, unless he was calling himself that to her, which is, I mean, like, why is that not weird to anyone? I mean, the thing is, though, it does seem to have gotten weird. She seemed to have been like catching on. And there's one account where she gives a woman a gift and tells her if it's Christmas, she tells her it's for Christmas. And then she's giving it to her now because she doesn't know. She's like, I'll just give it to you now because I don't know if I'll be around then. And to me, that's like super macabre and sad, macabre and sad. She was having this affair with Holmes. It could be that she was intentionally referring to him by different names because everybody knew that Mr. Holmes, not Mr. Phelps, not Mr. Belknap, was married. Now, there was a rumor that Emmeline was pregnant. Given the situation with Julie, it's like if that was the case, he probably killed her during an abortion, which again was common those days. What do we know? We know that a lot of motherfuckers disappear around this man. That's what we know. And the rumor around town was that he sent her back home after she got pregnant and accused her of keeping money she owed him. In 1893, he wrote a letter to her father telling her that she was going to Europe. And it went a little something like this. So he says this: "Dear sir, in answer to your letter of the 16th, I would say that Miss Emma left our employ on December 1st. I received her wedding cards about December 20th. She called at the office about 10 days later for her mail after her return from Michigan, where she was married, and again about Jan 1, at which time she was disappointed at not finding mail for her, and my remembrance is that she spoke of having written to you previous to that time. Before going away in December, she told me personally that the intention was that she and her husband should go to England on business with which she was connected. But when she called here, the last time she spoke as though the trip had been given up. Please let me know within a few days if you do not hear from her, and give me her spouse's address here in the city, and I will see him personally and ask if she has been there. As I know, she was in the habit of calling upon you quite often. Yours truly, H. Holmes." Now, days later, he followed up with another letter. Why do I keep saying lever? "I received your letter some days ago and called on Dr. Segran in regard to the same, and was pleased to hear from him of Mr. Phelps' whereabouts. For it seemed exceedingly strange until he explained matters to me that she should have neglected to write you, and inasmuch as she was writing for us, I felt in a measure responsible for her. Kindly let me know her address upon your receipt, as there is a paper pertaining to the Campbell Yates Company of which she was acting as secretary, which should be properly signed by her. Very truly yours, H. Holmes." Now, Dr. Segran had not been called on by H. Holmes. He had never met him in person. Holmes had gone as far as fucking making wedding announcements. He printed them in the December issue of the Lafayette paper. It said, "The bride, after completing her education, was employed as a stenographer in the county's recorder office. From here, she went to Dwight And there, from Chicago, where she met her fate, she is a lady of great intelligence and has a charming manner and handsome appearance. She is a lady of refinement and possesses a character that is strong and pure. Her many friends feel that she has exercised good judgment in selecting a husband, and all will heartily congratulate her. Psychopath. 100% psychopath. Now, I think we can all gather that she's dead. She's not coming back. And Holmes, in Holmes fashion, just moved on to someone the fuck else. Minnie was the secretary that Holmes told the new operators of the castle to wait for so they could meet. But she never showed up. I mean, shortly after the new operators pulled out. Now, Minnie Williams was an actress and decided to find more consistent work. She's like, look, I'm an actress. I get it. That's cute, but I need a job. So she decided to start working as a stenographer. And that's how she ended up getting a job with H.H. Holmes as his stenographer. Now, Minnie, who was from Mississippi, was born in 1865. Her father was killed in a railroad accident in 1872. And then her mother died shortly after. So basically now she's an orphan. Her and her siblings, they're all orphans. She has a sister and she has a brother. So she moved to live with her uncle in Dallas. And her sister Nanny, she wouldn't see her again for like another 15 years. The brother Baldwin was older. And she later found out he later found out that his sister Minnie was actually in the same school, Mansfield Co-ed College, that he was in. Now, he worked himself as a stenographer in Dallas and then ended up in Colorado. So Minnie was studying. She wanted to be an elocutionist. And they said she was very proper, elegant, but she hated men. And she would never talk to them. She wouldn't even look at them. She always stayed to her studies. And one account was like, quote, Miss Williams was regarded as very studious and intelligent, but she had great many queer ways. She was considered a man-hater and seldom would speak to male students or even notice them. And a Fort Worth reporter who knew her in Mansfield largely agreed. All regarded her as a brilliant character. They even wrote that she was also very modest and retiring and seemed to care little for society and gave her entire time to her studies. She was a brilliant conversationalist, good musician and elocutionist. She was a very graceful and elegant lady, though I would hardly have considered her beautiful, which I'm like, this why she ain't fuck with y'all. Because after you say shit like that, like, you just throw a pretty in there. Like, she's cute. Like, you could just do one of those. Just like sprinkle a little something in there. So that's why she hated men. So she finished up at Mansfield and she ended up in Boston where she studied elocution. And that was in 1886. Now, she also did some acting and some small plays in 86 and 88. Later, her brother Baldwin will remind her that she had a sister because she was like, oh shit, right, my bad, I forgot I had a sister. So she went back south, they reconnected. That was in 1889. She ended up basically paying for Nanny, her sister, to go to school. Now, Nanny was the same way. Super proper, very modest, but she was really religious. But everybody liked her. There was one lady that said Nanny was the reverse of Minnie. She was gentle and retiring. She was also the brightest of the two, naturally. She was not as well educated as Minnie because she had not enjoyed Minnie's advantages. She was of a religious turn and a very devout member of ME, which is Methodist Episcopal Church. In addition, she was docile and easily persuaded. Without resources of her own, she was dependent on Minnie for support, and she was only able to make her own living when she got the place at Midlothian. So while she was in the South, Minnie told Reverend Dr. Black that she'd married a man named Harry Gordon in Boston. It's not completely clear that he used that alias that early, but there's definitely records of him using it back in 1893. So, I mean, so knowing that her sister was like, good, she heads back and goes to get her postgraduate degree. And that was in 1890. She gets it at the New England Conservatory. Her guardian, who's also her financial agent, his name's John Massey, says that all of a sudden she starts spending a lot of money. Then she starts sending letters asking for money more often. And many looked at Massey as a father figure. So, he was like taking over her guardianship after this guy who his name was Judge Terry. So Massey, he had also developed his own relationship with Holmes. Now, Minnie had inherited some property in Fort Worth, Texas. That was in 1891. And after the death of Dr. Williams, her uncle, Minnie attempted to start her own theater business using the mortgage as capital. It sucked her dry, and then it failed. I mean, she was stubborn, and she was super independent and domineering, and her friends tried to convince her not to act because apparently she couldn't fucking act. They're like, could you please just like, you embarrassing us and I can't tell people that I know you. Now, there is a funny account though in 1891 in Colorado where the brother worked. There was a 6-woman fight that broke out in a saloon, and the women that were involved were named, and one was named Minnie Williams. It said, quote, knocked one Gussie Hayes unconscious, cutting a gash across her face in the process. Hayes only barely survived. So Minnie got down with the best of them. Now, Minnie ended up in Denver in 1892, where she was advised to settle down. This is where she was last spotted on stage. I mean, she gave up her dream, and then by 1893, she moved to Chicago to find work. It's hard to tell when she met him because she could have met him earlier in his travels because she was always on the move and he was always on the move. But she also could have met him in Chicago after she moved there. Now, according to Holmes, he said he met her in 1893 at an employment agency. And when he asked her about her history, she told him that her dad was a drunk, her mom was weak, and they're both dead. She was left with her sister and brother to fend for themselves. And then she ends up telling of basically bouncing around from guardian to guardian and stories of a fiance that she said gave her a presentiment of evil, which... same, sis. Same. This can't be verified though. And in this account, it's her brother who died on the railroad and not her father. Her brother is also who is inherited. Her brother is also the person she inherited the land from, which is also wrong. She got the land from her uncle. Her brother did die though. He died in 1892 and he died in an accident at work. So Holmes was in Chicago swindling 3 different companies. So it couldn't even be him because there was a rumor that couldn't have been him. But then there was a rumor that Peitzel was sent to Colorado, and it's believed by several people that Peitzel had killed a man in Colorado, and Holmes did know about it. I mean, that's also a possibility. Now, Minnie was ripe for the picking. I mean, she was coming into Chicago. She had money and property. Now, she eventually told her guardian that she was working at the Campbell Yates Company as a stenographer. The thing is about Minnie don't like men. So she's really, to me, with Harry Gordon for his money. Minnie is another one that clearly knew that Holmes had aliases. Now, in 1892, Minnie invited Nanny to Chicago. At this time, Minnie and Holmes were acting like they were married. So, where the fuck is Murda? While all this shit is going on, Minnie is now the owner of Murda's house that Holmes built for Murda and Lucy in Wilmette, which I'm like, that is just a different level of fuckboyery. I mean, she still you know, writing these letters asking for money from her guardian, Massey. She sold a portion of her Fort Worth property, and then the check gets motherfucking cash, and it's got handwriting on it that's not hers, so of course it's Holmes. And then a large loan was taken out by a Horace A. Williams, who was supposed to be her brother, but was most likely Holmes. So, according to Seltzer, though, between her involvement in so many plans, her request to Massey for more money, the stories of her being a man-hater, and her notes about how rich her fiance was, it looks as though many saw in Holmes not a lover so much as a man who could save her from a life as a stenographer. Now, Minnie may have been involved in some schemes, which, unlucky for her, would give Holmes reason to want her dead. She was also a racist bitch. I'm just going to call it like I see it. Because in, 1893, I get it. People were racist, but we got it on record. So she's a racist bitch. Clinton Sherman, a black expressman, claimed that Minnie was mean to him and would swear at him, but she also abused Holmes when he was around. Sherman said that he was afraid of her. So that is like, one of a couple of times that I've read that maybe the Minnie situation, she kind of had a little more control than the other women did, because he seemed to be frightened. He's like, I don't know what I'm dealing with. So meanwhile, Holmes moved Minnie and Nanny into a rented apartment in Lincoln Park. Now, the new apartment was like under Mr. and Mrs. Gordon. And by a few accounts, they were not used to cleaning the house and didn't even know how to run the stove. But people said that they were pretty happy. Now, in a way, Minnie thought she was hustling Holmes. On July 4th, though, a letter was written that said Minnie went to Milwaukee, which anytime we hear that any of Holmes's mistresses or wives, and maybe not so much wives because they surviving, but anytime we hear any of Holmes's mistresses taking a trip, they are not coming back. They're not coming back. While she was away, Holmes and Nanny were like kicking it at the fair, which is like, yeah, that's weird, but maybe not. I don't know. And witnesses saw Nanny and Minnie taking a morning walk the following day, but that's the last time anybody saw Nanny. Nanny ended up writing a letter to her aunt saying that she was going to Europe with Holmes, and there were no more sightings of Minnie beyond July of 1893. So, of course, the next day, promissory notes were taken out of, for money and payable to a Horace Williams. And later, they would come looking for a Minnie E.H. Robinson, who currently owned the drugstore, that they learned she was gone, and that she had been gone for several weeks. So the apartment was eventually vacated. And there was a letter from a Henry Gordon saying that the apartment was no longer needed. So Nanny's truck arrived at the depot, but just sat in the depot for a year. Kate Durkee last saw Holmes in July of 1893 while she was visiting Chicago, but had to leave after receiving a telegram of her sister being sick. Murda, which is like, oh, I'm glad you could join us, Murda, moved into the Wilmette house with her daughter and mother. She likely didn't even know that Minnie actually was the person that owned it. So, clearly, no one knew that Holmes was making his way to Fort Worth, Texas, and that is where he would go to claim Minnie's property, and that is where Holmes would go right before he does something that really gets him fucked up. And this is where I am ending part 2. Why? Because I gotta pee, and I'm drunk. So, I really hope you enjoyed this historical freak show that we have embarked on, because it's a hot mess, and I don't think it's not gonna get better. But I'll tell you what we have next, because we are an hour and 39 minutes in, and I'm very sorry for those who were like, this shit is too long, because sorry, but this dude, I'm trying to do this in 3 parts so we can move on to some cool shit, some cooler shit. You know what I'm saying? So let's get H.H. Holmes out of the way. But next time we're gonna talk about the Castle Fire. We're gonna talk about that cash out. We can talk about the World's Fair. We didn't really talk about that. We're gonna talk about, excuse me. Whoa. We're gonna talk about going west. We're gonna talk about his time in jail. We're gonna talk about the jailhouse snitch. We're gonna talk about the murder again that really got him fucked up. We're gonna talk about his time in jail. We're gonna talk about his execution, and we're gonna talk about American Ripper. We're gonna talk about that motherfucker being Jack the Ripper, because he probably isn't. I'm gonna just say that right now. But again, I just want to say that if you made it through this hour and 40 minutes with me, which I think is like 18 minutes longer than the last one, thank you. I appreciate it. This has turned into a very therapeutic experience. And I'm trying to get comfortable with the fact that this is the only time I can get this drunk during the week. So I love that I could do that with you bastards. And, we'll talk next week. And I hope you all stay safe. And I hope we already talked about this. Stop fucking with each other. Leave each other alone. Because y'all doing a lot. All right. Signing out. Peace.